As you can see here, the strut is slightly out of alignment. The strut was tweaked partially out of alignment when the propeller grounded out on some underwater object. And yes, it was a real struggle to remove the propeller shaft. After removing the propeller shaft, we found that the cutlass bearing was very unevenly worn, so we think that this misalignment has been there for quite a while. How we normally realign a strut is we take the strut bolts out, and then, with the shaft in place, we measure and build a new strut pad, then re-drill the original holes and bolt it back on. However, in this instance, that wasn't an option. Even by removing a plank, the strut bolts and nuts were hopelessly buried beneath fuel tanks and the cockpit decking. We needed to come up with some clever way to get the strut back in a line in a reasonable amount of time. The forward end of the cutlass bearing housing needed to come down a little over 1/8 of an inch and outboard just a bit. What we ended up doing was first removing the bottom paint from the strut. Then, with an acetylene torch and a rosebud, we heated the forward 2/3 of the strut, softening the naval bronze strut and making it easier to forge. We used an 1.5 inch piece of aluminum pipe as a gauge. The outside diameter of this pipe was less than the 2-inch propeller shaft that needed to go back in there. Before we started, the piece of pipe would hardly turn. It was bound up tight at the bottom forward end and at the top aft end. By using the peen end of a large ball peen hammer and a sledgehammer as a backup, we began peening the forward end of the strut. By peening mostly on the inboard side, we were able to move the forward end of the strut outboard a little bit the way it needed to go. After about 20 minutes, which is a long time when you're doing this, the piece of pipe turned freely, and you could see that it was all back in a line. We then reinstalled the propeller shaft, and it turned quite easily. Wow, hot dog, it actually worked! Having done a little blacksmithing before, I had the idea that metal could be moved this way. This is another bit of knowledge and technique shared to you by the Maritime Preservation Trust.